everyone, and welcome to our webinar. Before we get started, let's meet the presenters. First, we have Ricardo Arroyo. He joined WatchGuard in 2016 as part of the acquisition of Hexus Cyber Solutions. He is the principal product manager in charge of ThreatSync, WatchGuard's XDR solution, as well as mentoring product managers on the product management platform team. He brings more than 20 years of cybersecurity experience, having worked for the National Security Agency for 15 years as a network analyst, remote access tool developer, and master cyber operator. Ricardo was instrumental in guiding the development and deployment of WatchGuard's first cloud SaaS product, TDR, and continues to drive the development of future products for WatchGuard's unified security platform. And we also have Brendan Patterson, who is the Vice President of Product Management here at WatchGuard, with responsibility for the FireWire operating system, hardware, security services, and Wi-Fi. With over 20 years of experience in security and networking technologies, he has led WatchGuard to add new capabilities for advanced malware detection and SD-WAN networking into the network. That is all from me, and now I leave everything in Ricardo's and Brendan's hands. Thank you and enjoy.
Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be here. Let's start off with a quick agenda. So the focus of the presentation is going to be demystifying XDR. What is XDR and what is XDR important for, and what is it used for, and how it's going to be able to address the cybersecurity challenges that today all companies and managed service providers are facing today.
Thanks, Ricardo. So I get to kind of demystify XDR, start with some of the whats and whys here. And the first thing you probably should know about XDR is there's a lot of hype around it these days, and anytime there is something like that, it can be hard to sort out what it really means. But one thing that's clear, for a term that probably first originated around 2018, it's here to stay. XDR is extended detection and response, and cybersecurity vendors, analysts are pitching, talking a lot about it. There is so much buzz about XDR in the market today. And anytime there's something like that, you'll find no two vendors really define XDR the same way. A vendor is probably going to bias their definition of XDR towards what their solution can actually do. And what's interesting, in fact, no two analysts even define XDR in exactly the same way. We'll touch on that in a bit here. But XDR concepts really have a lot of potential, and you should understand them. I really see XDR as an evolution of cybersecurity technologies and where we've come to. Originally, we started back in the day with AV solutions, added more sophisticated EDR, and now we've evolved into XDR. So let's talk a bit more about it with the next slide, please. So what is XDR? Gartner's definition is a great place to start. Extended detection and response is a vendor-specific threat detection and incident response tool that unifies multiple security products into a security operations system. So Gartner's very clear on that vendor-specific, meaning it's not a SIM tool where you've been collecting information from all sorts of different sources. It's collecting all the different information from all the different vendor products into one source, providing a useful tool for incident responders. Some key elements you should note about XDR: it's really a product or platform offering where multiple security products participate. So a vendor that has a lot of security products should be bringing information, telemetry from all of those security products into their XDR solution. And then combined threat intelligence is used to detect and respond to incidents across the system. XDR solutions should be cloud native. If you hear someone tell you they've got an XDR solution installed on the server in their data center, that's not really XDR. In the Gartner view of the world, things are cloud native now. And I mentioned the vendor specific above. And why is that? Because really only the vendor that is responsible for the products themselves can build reflexive responses at the lowest level. And that OR in XDR is really important, the response. But that said, there is also the concept of Open XDR now, which is really a standards effort aimed at allowing multiple vendors' products to participate in a given vendor XDR. Now, if we go to the next slide, I mentioned no two analysts are exactly the same, so I thought it would be good for balance to talk about Forrester Research, another well-known analyst firm in the industry, and how they define XDR. First, Forrester really believes differentiated XDR technology will supersede and take over from endpoint detection and response, which we know is EDR in the short term, and longer term, it's really going to maybe even take over the place of SIEMs. And one thing I like about Forrester's material on XDR, they talk a bit about the evolution and how incident responders found a lot of value in EDR solutions, but EDR lacks the complete picture of the attack. And then incident responders are left to pick up the pieces. They start matching up what they see in their EDR alerts with information maybe they get in their SIEM system and analytics platform and try and correlate that together. But really, to serve the needs of those incident responders, what you need are additional telemetry sources in your XDR solution, richer alerts, and again, remember that OR, you need more comprehensive response capabilities as part of XDR. Now, just to kind of clarify maybe some confusion across analysts here, Gartner very kind of specific on XDR as a vendor-specific solution. Forrester called that native XDR, and then they introduced a term hybrid XDR, which is kind of equivalent to what Gartner would call Open XDR, where you're integrating sources from other vendors. It's a link to a good blog post from Forrester there if people want to follow up more on that. WatchGuard has worked with Pulse Research to do some research around what companies think of XDR and where they see it. Confirms the hype is on for us. In various surveys we do, XDR is really coming out as the top 1 or 2 technologies that people are looking at. So here's a survey of over 100 technology decision makers. Which of these emerging technologies has the most potential to significantly alter the way you do business over the next year? XDR came in second, and consistently in our research, we're seeing people are interested in. It's one of the top 2 or so technologies that people are looking at. Going back to Gartner, they do a lot of work in their research predicting where the market is going, what the global market drivers are doing. And in classic Gartner fashion, they put out predictions by given years. So they say by 2023, at least 30% of EDR and SIEM providers will claim to provide XDR. I would say in my research before this webinar that it's well over 30% now. Any of these vendors you go to has got some sort of XDR story on their website. Gartner predict by 2027, XDR will be used by up to 40% of end user organizations. And again, that's a fairly conservative estimate, I would think. And by 2027, also 50% of mid-market security buyers will leverage XDR to drive consolidation of workspace security technologies. So what that means is not only are people looking for XDR from the vendors they have now, but as they're making purchase solutions, they're beginning to think more about, I want an XDR solution. I want XDR with all these products from one vendor, an XDR solution my incident responders can use. And so it will leverage some of that consolidation. People looking at maybe I have 3 tools in my organization now for cybersecurity. Maybe if I combine all of those and I get one solid XDR solution, that will cut down and save time. And of course, other sources here, Cybersecurity Ventures, highlight how just overall global cybersecurity spending is increasing around the world. So what is XDR used for? It starts with data analysis. So an XDR system really needs to collect data from multiple sources, multiple products. And once it collects and aggregates that data, it's important to provide some correlation and context around that. And that today, that's where XDR solutions can leverage some machine learning, artificial intelligence type tools to add more context and correlation to that. And then it provides, like Forrester was saying, a solution for threat detection for instant responders to examine alerts and report on critical ones. So today there can be so much information, but an advantage of an XDR solution is it can take multiple indicators and combine them into one incident and show that to an instant responder and highlight something that is happening on the network, on an endpoint, on a server, in the cloud, or maybe an attack that's hitting all of those, and highlight that as one incident that needs a response. And it's important that XDR has response as part of that solution. And that response isn't just, oh, we've seen something, send an email to someone to take a look at it. The response needs to be a proactive remediation that removes a detected threat and applies security policies. And as we get into more details on cybersecurity, Ricardo will drill down more into some of that. We'll also talk about some use cases, but responses could be things like taking an endpoint off the network and isolating it, or maybe applying a policy or a blocked IP address on a firewall. So responses need to be proactive, not just notifying someone with the alert. It's good to follow up with an alert once something has happened, but there needs to be an attack response as part of the XDR solution. So Ricardo, tell us about beating cybersecurity challenges with XDR. What can we do?
All right, so let's start with a cybersecurity skills shortage, right? We know we're all in the middle of this shortage, right? Security teams are short-staffed and overworked. And at the same time, the security environment has become more complex than it has ever been, introducing new tools to address these needs. Lastly, we put that together with the transition to remote work, and all of these factors add massive amounts of complexities that put companies like yours at risk, right? Security organizations need integrated and proactive security measures to protect technology assets across the traditional endpoints, mobile and cloud. And adding these is not a viable solution because the teams need to learn each tool individually and would have to split time between switching between each individual tool. So let's talk about this siloed approach. The average company has been forced to take on an ever-increasing number of security tools to keep up with this turbulent environment. With so many different vulnerabilities to account for, a good spread of security tools is essential. However, this large arsenal can be a double-edged sword. Each of these solutions is siloed and operates independently. And then combining all of this with the daily IT security duties, fighting fires, responding to user requests, and there's very little time left for any of the strategic high-value activity that we want to provide to our company and to our customers. All of these siloed tools makes it difficult to get an accurate view too. Each tool provides a limited view in their area of specialty, and taken together, the result is an array of puzzle pieces that the security team must spend while fitting together. All of these things do eventually fit together, but waste crucial time. This time is time that an attacker has to further develop into your network to finish off their attack. And taking this, reducing the mean time to detection as well as the mean time to respond is crucial in providing success and security. So organizations must break down these silo walls if they're to reclaim this lost time and provide the security that they need. Okay, so how will XDR break down the silos? The answer is to tie the entire suite into a single platform. providing IT security teams with a central dashboard to monitor and control all of their solutions. The most effective security teams focus on enabling business outcomes with the acceptable risk. It's critical that security solutions break down these silos. Important for the security organizations to consider the architecture of their security solution and ensuring that they are open and flexible enough to deploy and run comprehensive security approach. What you see on the screen is the definition that Brendan had showed earlier with how the pieces that comprise an XDR solution. And with all of these pieces, it creates a hit list on the right-hand side that address these concerns and how we are going to break down these silos. Vendor ecosystem integrations, correlation of security data, centralization, normalization. These are all things that are going to make the job of providing security much more seamless for your IT and security operators. So how exactly will XDR work this, right? It's going to minimize visibility gaps, alert fatigue, and staffing challenges while improving productivity. On the left, we have a traditional EDR solution that performs detection on data collected by the endpoint agent. While there's a wealth of analysis that can be performed by endpoint data only, you only get visibility into the network, you don't get visibility into the network itself or endpoints that don't have an agent installed. In the middle, we have a traditional network UTM solution that provides robust detection across the entire network and can trend things like wide activity, anomalies, but it lacks the visibility of the activity at the endpoint. On the right, we have the XDR solution that ingests, normalizes data from multiple sources, correlates activities from both the network and the endpoint to synthesize new detections and detect anomalies, while clearly prioritizing the issues that demand immediate action. A comprehensive XDR platform requires that a vendor can deliver a product portfolio and a partner ecosystem with breadth, depth, and market maturity to seamlessly and meaningfully interconnect and correlate these detections. This good XDR solution will automatically make sense of the context and prioritize the risk. So plain and simple, XDR enables shared knowledge from one security platform. This is going to result in better coordination, team productivity, actionable visibility, while reducing alert fatigue, mean time to detection, and mean time to response. XDR powers the different security technologies and combine for a greater response than you could ever get from each individual tool. Now that we've seen how XDR overall is going to be addressing the needs of your company, let's go into some specifics on how it will address the specific security needs.
So I'm responsible for product management at WatchGuard. And if any of you on here are WatchGuard customers or partners, you'll probably have seen us talk about our unified security platform before. And basically, we have WatchGuard Cloud is our management layer where we can cloud manage all of our products, and that provides clarity and control over the different solutions we have. So I'm just going to use this as an example to talk about where, as one vendor, WatchGuard, where does XDR fit into our solution stack? So we have 4 main product areas. We have network security, which many of you know us for our firewalls. I think I have some red ones over my shoulder there. We have secure Wi-Fi solutions. We have multi-factor authentication and identity solutions with our AuthPoint capability. And we have endpoint security. So 2-3 years ago, WatchGuard acquired Panda, a European company that had a very robust endpoint detection and response solution. And we've seen, as I talked about the material from, say, Forrester and Gartner, how XDR has evolved from endpoint detection and response solutions because people were looking for more. Rather than going out to look at a SIEM solution and try and manually correlate some things you're seeing in there with some indicators that are showing up in the endpoint detection and response solution, XDR needs to bring this together. And this is what we call our shared knowledge layer as part of the unified security platform. We have a product cloud native ThreatSync, which is our XDR layer for detecting, correlating, and prioritizing advanced threats for either automated or manual remediation. And with any security solution, sometimes people like to maybe start in more of an audit mode and manually remediate as they see things. But with our ThreatSync, you can set that up for either manual, where you take actions directly in response to incidents, or have automated policies in place. Now, in our unified security platform, we also have flexible payment models, API integrations, and things like that. That's a topic for another webinar. But also part of our overall XDR solutions, what we call the automation core layer. The unified security platform, it's important for us to operate with as much autonomy as possible, not requiring manual operations. So we've built a lot of machine learning, artificial intelligence into the platform, including areas like ThreatSync, to cut down on the amount of manual tasks that are required. So you can see WatchGuard as a security vendor, we have a unified security platform, we have 4 main product areas, and our XDR solution right now works with our endpoint detection and response and network security. It's called ThreatSync, and it's an XDR layer for detecting, correlating, and prioritizing advanced threats. We have an ambitious roadmap for XDR. We're going to bring in the other products as well. And we like to say it's never going to be done. There's always going to be information to bring in. There's machine learning models that can be improved, tweaked to better help incident responders. And so on the next slide, Ricardo will actually show just a little bit of what that looks like.
Let's talk about ThreatSync. ThreatSync is an integrated platform that collects, correlates, analyzes, and responds to these threats using a detailed, contextualized, and actionable picture of your threat surface. WatchGuard's ThreatSync security puts security experts back in charge of their networks and endpoints with widely unified visibility, cross-detection, orchestration response to threats, features suitable for the organization, regardless of your budget, size, or complexity. WatchGuard puts XDR at your fingertips through ThreatSync with zero configuration and no additional charge, as it's included with the purchase of the existing product. As Brendan said, our initial release is going to include access integrations with our endpoint products and our network products, the Firebox. But in upcoming releases, we'll be integrating with our Wi-Fi products as well as our authentication product, AuthPoint. This is an example of WatchGuard ThreatSync, a few sample screens. What you get here is clean, succinct dashboards and reports that tell you exactly what events an incident responder should focus on, while providing the integrated tools to remediate across the WatchGuard Unified Security Platform. In addition, we have features like Brendan had said to automate that step. If you want, you can come here and manually isolate endpoints, you can block internet connections at your firewall, or you could create policy that automates that process. So once you're comfortable with the incidents that are showing up on your network and comfortable with the tool, you no longer have to log in on a daily basis to remediate these events.
One of the things people look at, and Ricardo touched on, is there's such a shortage of cybersecurity people today. It's hard to find good, capable people in information technology, even harder when you're looking for people with cybersecurity credentials. So many people at companies start thinking about, should I be working with a managed service provider, or even more specifically, a managed security service provider, an MSSP, for XDR solutions, or if this is something they should take on themselves. So one thing we wanted to highlight is maybe the benefits of working with an MSP, expertise, rather than you having to continually train, hire people, get someone skilled in cybersecurity and have them move away to another job because they get a higher offer or something like that. An MSP is maintaining that skilled team of experts, a bench of people that are current in the skills they need to monitor and maintain an XDR solution. And end users can really benefit from that knowledge and experience. Because of that, there are cost-saving benefits. So if you outsource your XDR management to an MSP, you avoid some of those expenses I talked about where you have to hire, maintain, train your IT staff. You get a predictable monthly fee or a contract for security on your system. And many managed service providers have kind of a menu or maybe 3 different levels of offering you can choose on, depending on how much you want to go in with that. They can completely manage your security or things, or maybe work with you to work with some people you have on site or on staff. It generally can be very flexible, and a lot of that may depend on the size of your company, the number of people you have. But overall, what we're looking for here is better security, and generally we see people working with an MSP are more likely to configure and set up their solutions correctly. An MSP that's doing that across 100 companies is going to have more skills, more experience than someone you have doing it just specific to your company alone. So although XDR solutions are helping to simplify and reduce the burden for incident responders, we still see in many cases the best choice is to go with a managed service provider for this. And like I said, they provide a lot of flexibility, so you can scale up, scale down services, fit it to your company's needs and things. So if you haven't looked at this, definitely it's something to consider. I haven't put the slide in here, but Canalys is another analyst or research firm, and they talked to a few hundred companies about XDR, and it seemed like a 50-50 split. Of the companies they talked to, about half of the people were looking at outsourcing that to an MSP rather than building up their own SOC themselves and continuing to invest more in that. So anytime we talk about technology, I always like to think of it in terms of use cases. How is this going to work in action, or what are some of the practical examples where you'll see XDR useful in your company? And as we were going through this webinar, this is one I really wanted to talk about because as product manager, I helped introduce our APT blocker service, our advanced persistent threat solution on the firewall. And that's where we send files to a sandbox where they're detonated for further analysis, looking for indicators that would indicate there's potentially some malware there. And one of the things we've seen as we introduce that is if you send a file by email, it's perfectly acceptable to delay that email by a few minutes while you're doing extra analysis of that file. If someone's going to a website and is opening a PDF file, downloading an Excel file, something like that, or even installing an executable they need, they expect to get that immediately. They're not going to wait 10 minutes while some sandbox is analyzing that and things like that. So as a provider with the security solution, we follow kind of the industry best practices here, where files are allowed to be downloaded immediately, even though we continue to analyze them and compare them to our threat intelligence databases, detonate them on sandboxes and things like that. So how does that fit into the XDR world? Well, think of the XDR approach where you detect, prioritize, contain, remediate, notify. So that detection may happen using behavioral analysis or machine learning. It may even happen with a detonation in a sandbox that takes a few minutes. That could indicate a zero-day APT. By zero-day, we're meaning a file that hasn't been seen before, and it's advanced, it's persistent, it's going to do a lot of damage, most likely some ransomware on your system. We can prioritize that in our XDR solution, and if it is a zero-day APT, give it a risk score that's high, probably something like a 10 out of 10 risk if we've identified there's a zero-day APT solution, and really highlight that to the incident responder. They can then, like I said, either manually or have an automated rule in place, take an action to contain that risk using containment actions. And it's not just email someone. If you're an MSP, you don't email someone, say, you've got trouble on your network. You need to take proactive remediation action. That could be isolating the endpoint, preventing it from talking to other nodes on the network. If we go back to one of the classic ones, WannaCry, when that back in 2017 was downloaded, got through people's systems, it did things like go out laterally, exploiting a Microsoft SMB flaw, and suddenly installed across multiple computers in an organization. If you can quickly, like Ricardo said, cut down that mean time to detect and then take action immediately with your XDR solution, you can isolate that node and block it from talking to other endpoints on the network. You want to remediate automatically using security policies to prevent future incidents. So that could look like that IP address that downloaded the bad file. Not only am I going to isolate the node, but I'm also going to set a rule on my firewall to prevent any further traffic to that bad IP address. So it's also a remediation across multiple security products. You're not just relying on your multiple products for detection, but they all can fit in and play a part in the remediation of the solution. And then you follow up and make sure everyone's notified with the alerts, with the emails, aware of what's happening. But that happens kind of at the end in the cycle. So it's just an example how, even though we have advanced technology with cloud sandboxing, with machine learning and everything, we still need to work and correlate that with what's happening on the endpoint and be able to take actions across both the endpoint and at the network firewall. So Ricardo, you've got a use case you want to talk through too, right?
So processes making malicious connections. There's many processes running on your computers that are not malicious, but can make malicious connections, including browsers and email clients. We are all aware of phishing. You get an email, it has a link, you click on it, it makes a malicious connection. And everyone is constantly plagued with advertisements that have malicious content, malicious URLs. So your XDR solution is going to be able to analyze that ongoing malicious activity, even if it's being generated by a benign process, to make decisions based on that, right? The XDR tool will monitor the network traffic and the endpoint activity and correlate that this process, even though it is trusted, it has made a malicious connection. After that, the tool will also assign it a risk score and prioritize it. Even though, it was already submitted as a trusted browser, it made a malicious connection. So we need to look into it further to see what is the destination that's being made, so that we can accurately determine whether it's a really malicious site that we should take further steps on. And sometimes those further steps are investigating further. Sometimes you have to look into the source of the advertisement in your browser. Sometimes you need to just look at the URLs. A known malicious one that downloads a second stage piece of malware. All of these type of activities should be available in your XDR tool. And as Brendan said before, we need to respond to that. As soon as we find out that we have a malicious action, you respond to it either by blocking the connection, that URL, from further connections, or by killing the process. With browsers and specifically, there are many times where one of the individual processes you have, you seem like you have one window of Chrome running or Safari or Edge, but it's actually 20 different processes. Each individual tab has its own process. Behaviorally speaking, if you were to kill one of those individual processes, one of the tabs will go into a little visibility where it has a little X that the tab no longer works. But when you go back to it, you just click refresh and you move forward, right? This type of activity is very proactive in making sure that you don't propagate further exploits, further downloads of malicious software, and it has a very little impact to the actual end user, depending on the application that was being run in the browser. And then, as Brendan said before, the last two steps are always the same. Once you're confident in what the tool is doing, set up automation to remediate these things moving forward. And as always, you have to notify the security team.
Okay, questions. While we're waiting on that, Ricardo, I have a couple for you about the WatchGuard solution you mentioned. So
yeah.
Someone said last time they looked at it, it was in WatchGuard's XDR was still in beta. What's the status now?
The status is that we will be going to general availability by the end of the week.
Excellent.
So everybody who has been anxiously waiting on ThreatSync and to start deploying it will not have to wait very much longer.
Great. And is this the first incarnation of ThreatSync, or I saw way back in your bio at the beginning of the webinar, it mentioned you came with the acquisition of Hexus. So can you maybe just tell us a little bit about the history there?
Yes. So what's interesting is that the acquisition was done for the technology that we came with it. It was an EDR solution back in the heyday of EDR, standalone EDR solutions like SentinelOne and CrowdStrike. What we did was we took that EDR solution and put it into AWS to make, again, WatchGuard's first cloud security service. But one of the unique things that our solution has always been doing is correlating network to endpoint activity. At the time, we had our own network agent, endpoint agent that didn't provide any sort of additional traditional AV services. But again, with the acquisition of Panda, we've decided to take all of the lessons that we learned in TDR and that rich cloud user experience that, you know, for those of you that have already used or deployed TDR, we're taking all of those lessons learned and created the next generation of ThreatSync, a WatchGuard cloud native application that works with the WatchGuard endpoint security that we acquired from Panda, as well as our rich suite of existing network products. All, again, focusing on the incident responders so they have the actions, the visibility, and the actions that they need right at their fingertips.
Okay. People have got warmed up and the questions are flying in now. So let me start with some of the easy ones. I'm seeing a lot of questions that indicate that people are probably coming from a WatchGuard background. So let's get through some of these. First off, can I have XDR with one of only these products? For example, the endpoint only or the firewall only? You want to take that one, Ricardo?
Sure, yes. We've designed ThreatSync so that the rich visibility is useful regardless of how many products that you use. So as that screen capture showed that list of incidents that are occurring on your network, it provides the visibility of every individual product. But the key thing is the more products that you have, the more rich the correlation in those incidents are going to be. But you will absolutely get utility even with the individual purchase.
Yeah. Next question, what's the average US price per endpoint? I'll just take this one. I want to highlight that our ThreatSync solution is included with the top level bundle on each package. So if you already have total security on our firewall, you get ThreatSync as part of that. And in fact, as part of total security, we have upgraded our TDR host sensor to a component called the EDR Core, which is based on the same EPDR technology. Doesn't have all of the features, but that's something we can run through with WatchGuard partners and customers on that. So again, big part of WatchGuard is simplicity in our SKUs and licensing. So ThreatSync XDR is included at that top level package across all products. If you want specific pricing on EPDR in your region, that's available on your local price list. You can talk to your WatchGuard representative about that. Here's a good one, Ricardo. Can XDR remediate traffic on firewalls that are not cloud managed in WatchGuard Cloud?
100%. The requirement for fireboxes participating in ThreatSync is, again, a total security license, but they only have to be connected to WatchGuard Cloud for visibility. Even remediation actions will function on a firebox that is only connected to WatchGuard Cloud for visibility.
Okay, here's one I'll take too. Is the feed for the product FedRAMP compliant? And just for people on the webinar who may not know it, FedRAMP is a US federal certification for cloud products. WatchGuard is not FedRAMP certified. We don't have any plans to get FedRAMP certified for our cloud products. We do have ISO 27001 2 certifications indicating a lot of process and procedure around operations of our cloud products, and those certs are posted on our website. So someone asked about that transition from TDR, Ricardo. If I'm using TDR now, can I seamlessly transition to ThreatSync when it becomes available? What does that look like?
Yes, so the current TDR host sensor that you have deployed is not included in the next generation ThreatSync that's in WatchGuard Cloud. But we do provide a user experience that allows you to seamlessly migrate from the TDR host sensor to its replacement, EDR Core, based on the WatchGuard endpoint security technology. So when you're browsing WatchGuard Cloud, if you go to administration, there's a new page that says upgrade TDR to WatchGuard endpoint, and that will provide you with a UI that will seamlessly start upgrading individual host sensors to the WatchGuard endpoint product. Now, that being said, we don't copy settings, so you have to be aware that before you start the migration that you have to set up the WatchGuard endpoint security correctly so that you don't miss certain aspects. Like if you're using the VPN validation as part of TDR host sensor that interacts with a Firebox VPN, you need to configure that before starting the migration. But what you don't have to do is a manual rip and replace. The TDR host sensor will automatically download the endpoint agent and upgrade itself to EDR Core.
Okay. Let's maybe step away from some of the WatchGuard specific content and questions for a minute. And there's a good question here. Someone asked, what is the difference between SOAR or XSOAR and XDR? Are they the same or what? If you could explain. You want to start with that? And I have my thoughts on it too.
Sure. XSOAR is, so SOAR stands for Security Orchestration.
Orchestration, yeah.
That's what it is.
Okay, between us, we got it.
Yes, we got it. And it's supposed to be extended with the X. As with every new product area, as people build their tool, whatever category it is, they find that they can add little bits and pieces. So what XSOAR tends to do is try to bring in pieces of visibility that you would traditionally get with your SIEM, in addition to doing all of the orchestration stuff that they're expecting to do. The difference is that XDR is an evolution more from the EDR world, where they use different sorts of threat intelligence as well as usually some sort of artificial intelligence to come up with new detections that you couldn't possibly do with a traditional AV. And what makes XDR unique is that you're doing that across the data sets from different products, right? So there's no way that you can synthesize a detection without having both the endpoint, the network, and the identity information, right? An XSOAR doesn't have that, usually have that capability to make that advanced detection before going through the orchestration tasks.
Yeah, and I would also consider XDR as more accessible to, like you say, it's grown out of EDR technology, where SOAR solutions tend to be big implementations. Even SIEM solutions require a lot of maintenance and update and implementation. And then SOAR was an evolution of SIEM to add more response capabilities instead of just collecting all your logs for PCI compliance or whatever. Whereas XDR has grown out of more EDR capabilities that many more companies have, and a big part of it is making it simpler for those instant responders to manage responses and detections, etc.
That's one thing that I'd like to add as well when you're looking at the different XDR solutions is to find something that works for you. A lot of what you'll find in the market is a large product that, caters to 100,000 different, end customers or different size products, right? With SOAR in specific, their idea was always this multi-step playbook that you want to automate, this 100-step analysis process. While with our product, ThreatSync, we simplify that to a single step of, well, you already know what the analysis says by WatchGuard. What's the next step, the single next step that you want to take? It really simplifies the workflow, so you don't have to spend as much time learning something like how to build an entire workflow in a SOAR tool.
Okay. Next one, getting away from some of the specifics of our GA this week, but longer term vision, OpenXDR. Does WatchGuard plan, Ricardo, to add things like O365 or Azure Logs into our XDR solution?
Yes, we plan in the long term to start doing integrations with some common third-party vendors that already provide some sort of detection capability. What that will look like is still under determination and development, to maximize our capabilities without overburdening, you, the customer, with too much additional cost. So we are looking at that. What exactly will it look like? I can't say at the moment.
Okay. We obviously have quite a few WatchGuard customers on here, so let's go back to just a few of the specifics they have about our new product and transition here. What are differences between EDR Core that you get as part of Total Security and the full EPDR or EDR solution?
So there are a few individual feature line items that are not available with EDR Core. The preventative capabilities that our current EDR and EPDR provide to block malware.
Yeah, it's more the disinfection capabilities are not available in EDR Core. So changing registry entries, cleaning up after an incident, that's more an endpoint type solution.
Yep.
It doesn't have a full signature database on the endpoint like you would expect from an EPP solution. The full EPDR solution includes a lot more in terms of things like a firewall on the endpoint, URL filtering, mobile device management. So extra add-ons on the endpoint are not included in the EDR Core. It's very much focused on that blocking malware capability. Much better than TDR at that, by the way, and it has much better anti-tampering capabilities, more contextual detections. It does better with fileless malware. So it's a big upgrade in terms of the value, the capability it provides compared to our TDR solution, but it's a very small lift in terms of installation and transition into it.
And another thing to note is the Zero Trust Application Service, where we block unknown files until it's analyzed by an analyst. That's not available in EDR Core, nor are the available to add modules. So that's something just to be aware of.
So someone asked about one difference. Does EDR Core include CyberCon like TDR?
No, unfortunately, the majority of the feedback that we got with CyberCon was that it was a bit on the confusing side, especially in an environment where if you really had a small number of policy, you could just enable and disable them immediately. So what we're doing with this first release of ThreatSync is we're going to send it out without a shortcut batch method like we had with CyberCon, to just stick to our core tenet of simplicity.
James asked, why would you not go with EPDR? And I love the question, James. Thanks. And absolutely, we believe everyone should go with that full EPDR solution. But people always don't. Perhaps they had a different solution installed. It's still under contract, things like that. Maybe it is a different silo. People who had installed or purchased an endpoint solution within the organization. So our EDR Core is a great complement to an existing antivirus that may be running on endpoints. But I also agree with you, why would people not go to the full EPDR? So we've built in that it's really just a license update. You can even run a trial from the EDR Core to the full EPDR solution. It's a very easy transition from one to the other. I see someone, you mentioned Forrester believes XDR will supersede EDR and SIM. We currently have EPDR, but haven't yet implemented a SIM solution. With XDR, do we still need to implement a separate SIM solution? Do you want to start with that one? That's a great question, I think, because a lot of people are kind of pondering, wondering where things like this go. And when you see Forrester saying things like XDR is kind of replacing EDR and will potentially take on SIEM solutions in the future. What are your thoughts on that one, Ricardo?
I think the trend is going that way in general, as more companies invest more money and more technology. But it's highly dependent on what kind of data the market that we're aiming for is really looking to do the analysis on, right? It's very expensive to become like a cloud SIEM solution. So the idea of ingesting everybody else's data just rings dollar signs in my head. So the providers that are going to be doing things a little smarter, where they don't necessarily have to ingest absolutely everything from a third-party vendor and do analysis on either detections or limited subsets of data with APIs, those are going to be the solutions that you're going to find are going to be more successful. That's more along the lines of what we're doing analysis for OpenXDR, is finding the right data as opposed to ingesting all data.
Yeah. And one thing I'd add, especially, at WatchGuard, we deal a lot with mid-market companies. For many, a SIEM solution is just too big a lift, too expensive, too difficult to install. You need someone trained to manage and maintain it, and they don't have it. So XDR is a great new option for people that don't have a SIEM solution today. There's a couple of questions, Ricardo, coming kind of from a background of people who were maybe Panda customers. Can Panda AD 360 feed into XDR? And going beyond Panda, what about other EPDR type solutions?
So since we are focusing ThreatSync as part of the unified security platform, the piece of the unified security platform is WatchGuard Endpoint Security. So today, there's no plans to integrate Panda AD 360 into WatchGuard. Now, that being said, WatchGuard as a bigger project is working on a migration plan to get our AD 360 customers onto WatchGuard Endpoint Security. That is still in the works. But there are tools and procedures available to transition manually if you feel like you want to go down that route. Please contact your sales or sales engineer, and they will start working with you to, if you really feel that you need ThreatSync and you want to go through the manual process of transitioning from Panda to AD 360, there are some tips and tricks that you can use to move the protection itself from one to the other, not necessarily the settings or the data.
Yeah, and it looks like coming up on time here, so we want to finish before the hour. Maybe one final question, and I'll let people know, we'll review the questions. If there are any we did not get to in the time, we can follow up. We have people's email. I even noticed someone asked for some follow-up discussion offline. But just to finish on kind of the same theme, Ricardo, will there be any data from additional add-on features of EPDR like patch management or encryption included in ThreatSync, either today or in roadmap?
In the short term, no, but there are conversations about using whatever data we have available and detections available in the portfolio in ThreatSync. For example, there is an upcoming feature, I think one that was just released recently, to provide a host vulnerability based on the lack of patching. So we do have a plan on the roadmap to integrate that as part of the overall device risk assessment, which, by the way, leads to also an overall device risk assessment report in ThreatSync. So that is all coming on the roadmap, hopefully within the next year. As for other sources like data control or encryption, everything is on the table for us to look for in the future.
And okay, I'll sneak one last one in because I like to talk about our products and when they do things well. Do you support fileless? Yes, we detect fileless malware. And from anyone coming from TDR, that's one of the great improvements, I would say, compared with the new EDR core versus our old TDR solution, taking advantage of that Panda technology we've acquired to build in better detections and preventions for fileless malware attacks. So with that, I think we're at the top of the hour. I'd like to thank everyone for joining today. A lot of good content, not a lot of questions at the start, but they came thick and fast near the end there. So a lot of interest, and especially in where WatchGuard is going with this. So we will definitely continue to follow up with people. Any closing thoughts, Ricardo?
No, thank you for everything. This has been great feedback, great questions. I look forward, like Brenda said, following up with some of you offline to talk about this deeper.
Okay, thank you, everyone.